Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Manos Sucias. When I started this film, I immediately knew it felt like a very tight economical thriller, but then it slowly kind of became more of a character thing. Two estranged brothers who are using a boat that has a torpedo filled with cocaine, a torpedo that's empty that they can float underwater, so no one sees they have as much cocaine as they have, are in Colombia and are traveling to another part of Colombia with the cocaine. They're kind of drug smuggling, and they're on this journey with another man, and eventually that guy does them wrong and he gets killed after he kills a kid, but they keep going on, and on their way you learn a lot about them. The whole film is really their journey to get this cocaine from point A to point B. I kind of thought about that while I was watching it, and I was thinking about these two brothers, one very fun, very silly, more charismatic, one very serious, very stoic, and I kind of realized what Manos Sucias is. Manos Sucias is kind of an old school Western. Not like a Sergio Leone or a post-Sergio Leone Western. It's more like before that, when John Ford was the major influence on Westerns. When Westerns really didn't have that many action sequences in them. There was the big thing at the end. There was maybe something in the middle or at the beginning. But they're mainly kind of like small kind of character plays. They're really like two guys sitting around and talking to one another. It's really just male bonding for the most part, and Manos Sucias is made in that tradition. The whole idea of two guys traveling with something throughout this whole film that they have to get to another point, and all the things that go wrong during it, reminds me so much of that. But I think that's what's so amazing about it, because it understands the character in doing a story like that. Westerns really understood that. They understood that's how they'd get the audiences to stay and love their movie, was that they love the characters, that they love the story. They really weren't as much about the action. I know people talk about the old John Wayne movies and such like they are more about violence and this machoism, but if you really watch them, that's not true. And Manos Sucias gets that so well. It's very contemplative. It is very economical, but it's almost kind of loose in that it lets the two brothers just sit in this boat and talk when they have to wait at certain moments. But it also like doesn't let go of kind of its classic Hollywood structure. It's kind of unconscious. This is a first-time director, Joseph Waricla, I think. I'll have his name under here. I probably mispronounced that. He really gets the kind of story that this is. You can feel that throughout the film and how to approach this subject matter, and apparently he did a lot of research on this area. It's interesting that when he's showing society in Colombia, where so much of that area has to do with the drug trade and has seen violence, they almost understand how painful it is, how that's going to happen, and how you're going to be put in the situation to do that sort of thing. It's kind of told in that way where it understands the kind of story it needs to be for those characters. And not every film does that, not every film should do that, but Manos Sucias does it in such a way that it's kind of classical. It is very much a road movie, but it understands how road movies really work, even though it's on water most of the time. But most of the Westerns were road movies while they're moving cattle, and all the things that would happen, all the things that would go wrong, and many things go wrong in Manos Sucias. He really had a rich, kind of well-rounded story. I think when you look at the old Hollywood films, they really understood in a Western how to make kind of a well-rounded kind of character piece, because when that violence happens, it actually has to mean something, and it has to make kind of an impact. And I think Manos Sucias, in those moments when it does, it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was just very earth-shattering to see some of those images, because I knew these guys so well, because I had let them talk about their hopes and dreams and what their lives were like. And almost the older brother, a lot of what he was talking about kind of reminded me of the old kind of buddy movies or an old Western where he talked about how he wanted to get out of the drug trade and move to another town, and this was his last job. It just all reminded me of that. And I was talking to a friend about this like a couple months ago. It's like nothing is like the old Hollywood Westerns anymore. I would really like it if something was. And this film, I guess, answered that call, but it doesn't in a way that it's not calling it out. And I don't know if he thought about that when he was making it. I just picked up on that, and once I picked up on that, all of it made, not that it didn't make sense, but it made even more sense to me, and showed me how smart of a filmmaker and a storyteller he was. There's certain parts of this film that feels like kind of almost a generic foreign film, but it's a lot smarter than that. And I think nowadays a lot of people go, oh, it's a slow burn of a thriller or some shit, but it's really just a slower, patient story that understands exactly what it's doing. And at the end, you're going to feel something. You're going to be hit with these emotions because you've watched them go through all this. It doesn't want to linger on plot points. It knows when to get out, but it also wants to linger on specific moments for the story and for the character, and understands what's important and what's not. It's actually fairly well told. I'm seeing a lot of people now who are better at telling like a small little story. It's like, okay, I don't have anything else to wow the audience with, so I better get them to remember this. Manos Sucias understood that the way the old Hollywood directors did. They understood they had to leave you with an impression, and Manos Sucias leaves me with a fucking impression. It leaves me thinking about that world, but also thinking about that kind of a story. It makes me think about how desperate people can be, how they have to be in the drug trade, how that's the only economic way out. Being put in that extreme poverty and being almost forced into a certain situation to do some of these things and to do these violent acts that there's like really no way out of. The political climate down there and how harsh it is, it does feel like the Wild West in a lot of ways. I was kind of just a little shaken for a good while after I saw this movie. How it did that was it made me just think about how strongly placed and how memorable those guys were, even though this feels like it's almost like paint by numbers in a lot of what it's doing. I've seen tons of movies like this before, but it seems to understand why those things are the way they are and why those things are placed the way they are and why you need to put red in number 1 and blue in number 2. It like gets all that and understands the use of that. And there's certain amount of craftsmanship to this film that maybe people won't really get because it is smaller and quieter for a lot of its runtime, but it doesn't feel smaller and quieter when you're leaving the theater and thinking about it. And it opened my eyes to a newer filmmaker that I'm really excited for, and it took me a little bit to get into it, but once I was into it, I knew everything about these characters. It kind of sneaks up on you in a really nice way and really grabs hold of you. And maybe some things about it are a little silly and a little generic, and that hurts it as much as helps it in some cases, but I think Manos Sucias is the kind of movie that isn't like what's going on, that in a lot of ways is kind of more of what I like to see. It shows me a filmmaker who understands the storytelling elements and understands why he's using them and why he's using them for those characters. And it left me with a really rich, amazing film experience that really stuck with me, and I don't think it's gonna let me go for a while when I really start thinking about this movie. It's the kind of film I'd really like to watch again. As much as you don't think there's much going on at the beginning, there's a ton going on. It's just carefully laid out to have a really powerful hit at the end, and done in that perfectly told, well-established, well-made kind of story way. That's one of the things I've always really kind of loved about filmmaking and storytelling, and the marriage between those things. So if you have seen Manos Sucias and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And I expect someone to make a Manos Hands of Fate comment. I'm sure that's going to happen. I mean, how can you not? It translates to dirty hands, in case you're wondering.